Atum comes out of the waters of Noon. So you have Atum coming out of the waters of Noon, and Atum being alone decided to do something about it. And Atum created Shu, who is the god of the air, and Tefnut, who is the goddess of moisture and of mist. So Atum tasked, and I shouldn't say he, Atum is formless, has no male form or female form, just Atum. So Atum tasked Shu and Tefnut with the job of basically taking the chaos of the waters of Noon and basically doing something with it, making it more stable. So they basically had a job to stabilize what we would consider the cosmos or the universe. And we're talking about something that's so big that it's almost an impossible job. So Shu and Tefnut, they took part of this darkness, this chaos. They created light and darkness. They separated some of the chaos, some of the waters of Noon, into light and darkness. So they then put in place Ma'at. Ma'at was there to basically govern, to be the principle of light and darkness. So then they created, Shu and Tefnut created Geb, which is the earth, and Nut, which is the sky. Now, when it was first created, they was together, but because the principles of Ma'at needed them to be separate to function correctly, Shu basically came in between them and separated them. Now, when you look at this hieroglyphic, a lot of you have seen this. It's like a female who was like arched over, a bunch of stuff. It's always a lot of different things that's under Nut or Nut. And this is the sky. That's a representation of the sky. So when you see this depiction, now you understand, okay, this female who is arched over all this stuff is the sky. That is Nut or Nut. And under it, you see Geb or Jeb, however you want to pronounce it, which is basically earth, and it's stuff in the middle. So, Shu came in between them to separate them. And, Nut basically allows the sun, to rise and set, and allows for the rain to occur and everything like that, so that things can grow on the earth or on Geb. So after this stuff is done, and that's the creation of the sky and earth, then you had Shu and Tefnut create Isis, Osiris, Hathor, Seth, Thoth, and Nephthys. So now understand there was still much of this chaos and darkness, this waters of Noon, that was, undeveloped, untouched. So when Shu and Tefnut went out to basically start developing it, they got lost. And Atum, sent his eye out. Now, one of the things I'll get into in a little bit later, you had Atum, who had this eye that can travel the cosmos. It can travel through the waters of Noon. We're going to talk about this in a little bit. And they came back. Shu and Tefnut came back with the eye of Atum, and he was so happy. Atum was so happy that he basically wept, and the tears that fell to Jeb basically created us, the human race. Now, of course, this is a mythological creation story, but there's so much more to it when you understand the principles of what these things represent, which is we're going to be getting into this some in this video and in videos to come. But this is important because they made a story so basic that is so highly complicated, so that when you understand what it's talking about, it's like, wow. I mean, how do you make the most complicated story that you understand, able to translate to anybody who reads it? Let's put it that way. So when you understand the story in this capacity, and it lets you understand what they're talking about a little bit more, especially when that, Atum is Adam, and everything in the universe is created, made of atoms. Now, understand, when the humans was created, of course, they were supposed to abide by the laws of Ma'at, the rules, the principles of Ma'at, and to basically worship the gods, the Netchers or Netarus. So understand, all of this stuff is about energy. The whole metaphor about these guys and everything has to do with energy. This is where they get the whole quantum physics. This is where they get the story of the flower of life. And of course, the creation story in the Bible. All of this stuff comes from out of these stories. So now understand, when you go into the Memphite text, which is basically the Shabaka stones, we find Ptah. This is where Ptah is found at. So now Ptah, who is the creator god, is said to have been the one to have created Atum. So now the Shabaka stone says that when Atum came out of the waters of Noon, it was because Ptah spoke him into existence. So Ptah, the creator god, from the waters of Noon, or from wherever, spoke Atum into existence. And this is how, Atum came to be. So now when we go and we read it, it says, there took shape in the heart. There took shape in the tongue of the form of Atum. For the very great one is Ptah, who gave life to all the gods in their kas, which is basically their energy or soul, through this heart and through this tongue. And for every word of the God came about what the heart devised and the tongue command. So now, again, speaking things into existence. Now we understand, where the Bible stole, let there be light, and speaking things into existence. When you get into like wizardry or witchcraft, it's about spells and speaking things, magical words. Understand where this stuff is coming from. It all comes from here. Ancient Kemet. So Ptah, the creator god, is, and a lot of people get confused with that. As I said before, it depends on where you go. You're going to get different stories. You got to understand how this stuff fits and where it goes. So in the Memphite text, which comes from Memphis, and the Shabaka stones, which the Shabaka stones is basically the Memphite text that when it was found was so worm eaten, like it was supposed to be like damn near destroyed, that the Sut Shabaka basically had it translated and put into stone on the Shabaka stone. It's named after him. So at some point, somebody used the stone for something else. And this is where you see the square and the lines in it that's not supposed to be there. So we basically can't read the entire text and what it says. There's stories on the top and on each sides of it that we can make out, but it's more to it. But it's basically destroyed because of, the person who did this to it. So, that little sun looking thing or the square in the middle, I forget exactly what they was doing. It's not supposed to be there. But, understand, depending on where you are at in Kemet, the stories are different. But, most of them is going to the same principles that the ancients wanted you to understand. Now, according to the Memphite theology, which is the theology of Memphis, under the rulership of Shabaka, and the Memphite text, you have Ptah being the creator god. Now, Memphis became the capital of Kemet, the capital of Egypt. So now when you go into the Memphite text, when you look at Ptah being the creator god, it talks about Ptah creating the Agdod. And the Agdod is basically like the elements or the components that make up the reality that created our reality, or make up the water waves of Noon, or the waters of Noon I just talked about, the darkness, the chaos. What made that stuff up? This is the Agdod. And you see the depictions of Ptah on the potter's wheel creating the egg. And from the egg, the Agdod, which Agdod basically means the eight, is we get these components that made up the reality that created our reality. It's really deep stuff. So now, what are these 8 things? Now, understand these 8 things, as I talked about in part 1, our reality has a dual nature. Well, so does the reality that created our reality. There's a dual nature to reality, and that's what the Agdod is about. So now when you look at the Agdod, we have Nun and Nunet. We have Ha and Hahet, Ka and Kaket, Amon and Amonet. So these very funny sounding names are very powerful things in the Memphite theology, and They are basically what the components are that created the reality that created our reality, or we could just call it space or the universe, that darkness that's out there that we can't see, that we have, so many questions about. This is what this stuff is made of. So when we look at Noon and Noonette, that is the waters or the abyss, the watery abyss. We have Ha and Hahet, which basically represents the infinite, the finite, and the infinite, the endless and the end. We have Ka and Kalket, which basically represents the light and darkness. So Ka and Kalket represents the light and the darkness. Then we have Amon and Amunet, which basically represents the seen and the unseen. So when you think about the universe out there, when we think about space and what that stuff really represents. I mean, when you think about the light and darkness, in space, we have darkness and we have stars. We have little peaks of light. So also space is supposed to be infinite, but we know it's only a certain point that we can go to. So it's not infinite to us, in this material form, but it's infinite in reality. And then, of course, we have the seen and unseen. Now, some things that we cannot see with human eyes, but they are there, they exist. And then the whole abyss or the chaos is, the chaos that is space. The waters, I'm going to explain later what the water waves of Noon represent. I'm going to get into that later. But when you look at these components, I mean, they basically make up what we consider space. The reality that created our reality. This is how they looked at it, the ancient Egyptians. So we have Noon and Noonet, Ha and Hahet, Ka and Kalket, Amon and Amunet. I could be pronouncing them wrong. I could be pronouncing them right, but this is basically what they are and the principles that they represent. Water, chaos, endlessness, infinite and the finite, light and darkness, and of course the seen and unseen. So these are very important principles that were created according to the Memphite theology by Ptah, who basically is the one, you might as well say. This is why they stole them and made an Oscar out of them, because it's very important. We talk about a very powerful principle here. Ptah, the creator God, and it's messed up. We only got that one little teeny statue of Ptah. You would think, it would be so much more of him, but this is like really deep knowledge. And a lot of people don't know if this knowledge was only taught in like the mystery schools about who these beings are, or if, everybody was taught to them, was taught about this stuff. But the principles, when you get into the deepness of this stuff and how deep it goes, you'll understand why it would have been probably hard for some people to understand. And, they probably made it, way more easier for people who were in the advanced schools or who were becoming like the priest and everything like that. And we don't know exactly how they was taught and what information that they received. But when you get into this stuff, when you get into the Memphite theology, when you start getting into stuff that is this deep, I mean, it don't really get too much deeper than the reality that created our reality. And you start thinking about somebody who actually had the mindset to give it a name and ascribe to it principles. I mean, if you had to go and name what this stuff is, I mean, you would be sitting there all day. But they came up with basic principles that describe the reality or the nothingness, whatever you want to call it, the darkness, the void, or whatever that created everything. And they call it the water waves of Noon, and Ptah was the creator God of it all. So now the Agdod, again, the Agdod would basically be what existed before space, before, there was even space. Think about that. Before time, before the planets, before the universe, Ptah created the Agdod. And the components that make up space, not only did the ancient Egyptians give them names, but these things are also represented by, wait for it, serpents and frogs, snakes and frogs. So the Noon, Noonet, ha ha het, caw caw ket, amon and aminet are represented by frogs and serpents, frogs and snakes. So this is going to help you understand a lot more when you look at it, when you start looking at the overall picture. So remember, when you walk into the temple of Hathor and you look up, what do you see? You see them, the snakes, the frogs, and people who are trying to understand, what is this stuff about? What is the serpents about? Oh, it gets much more deeper, people. So when you go back to Saturn Satan, when I was talking about this stuff, you can understand now. It's deep. It's going to get a lot more deeper. So when you go into the temple of Hathor, when you look up, when you start looking at the hieroglyphics and you see this stuff on the ceiling, and you understand now, why is this stuff on the ceiling? Because it's talking about space. Look at the waves at the bottom right there. Now you understand the waves. Now you understand when you look on the ceiling, you see these waves. You see people on boats. See, if you don't have this knowledge, then you can look at this stuff and you won't know what the hell it's talking about. Why the hell are they putting people in boats, in the sky, on the ceiling? What are snakes and frogs doing here? Now you understand what they represent. You see the stars while they're on the boat. You can look at these depictions and you can understand how the Europeans got them completely wrong.